In the coastal villages of Fiji, a polished whale tooth could pass from one hand to another in a single ceremony, but the debt it created could remain active for generations. The transfer was brief, the obligation was not. Once accepted, the tabua belonged to the recipient, but the relationship it opened continued long after the mat was rolled away. The object had moved. The claim had only begun. This was not money in the modern sense. It did not erase obligation by settling a price. It made obligation visible, public, and difficult to ignore. Value was not counted. It was recognized. Debt was not written down. It was carried by people who remembered. Before coins, before banks, belief ruled the world. These islands, scattered across the Western Pacific, had long organized cooperation through systems of reciprocity that relied on memory, rank, and ritual. Fijian society stored its most significant wealth in tabua, carefully polished lower jaw teeth of the sperm whale, often strung on a braided cord of coconut fiber. The word tabua itself carries the root of tabu, sacred or set apart. They were instruments of alliance, compensation, and transition, reserved for moments when ordinary exchange could not suffice. Each tabua required preparation before it could carry this weight. The tooth was cleaned, smoothed, and polished with sand and stone until raw material became a recognized vessel of social power. Its value did not come from rarity alone. It came from the labor, ritual, and memory attached to it. A tabua entered circulation most often when a sperm whale beached itself on the reef or shore. Because Fijians did not hunt large whales, each tooth represented a rare and unpredictable gift from the sea. Once prepared, the tabua was presented in formal yakona ceremonies. Chiefs and elders sat in prescribed order. The giver placed the tooth on the mat, spoke the precise purpose, apology, request for support, or sealing of peace, and waited for acceptance. The ceremony ended, but the claim did not. The system worked because the tabua transformed rare sacred material into public obligation. Its acceptance imposed a moral and social burden that both parties understood. A single tabua could compensate for a serious injury or death, or persuade a neighboring village to join in defense. Lower items might accompany it, but the tabua stood alone as the measure that could not be refused lightly. The tooth moved once, the obligation moved forward. Yet each solution revealed a new dependency. The tabua made obligation public through ritual, but only those of sufficient rank could wield it effectively. Not everyone could use it equally. The system depended on shared recognition across generations without written records. The tooth worked only while people remembered the same history. Scarcity gave the tabua authority, but also made access uneven. Supply depended on rare whale strandings and regional exchange with Tonga or Samoa. Tabua could be inherited or passed between chiefly lines, extending their influence over decades. As communities grew or conflicts multiplied, demand rose while the source stayed scarce. The obligation it sealed could not be hurried. The tabua solved one problem by creating another. It allowed obligation to move through an object, but it still depended on people remembering the conditions of that movement. The tooth could be held in the hand, passed across a mat, and displayed before witnesses. But the real value remained outside the object itself, in the memory of who had given it, why it had been accepted, and what future return it required. Without recognition, the object remained valuable, but the claim attached to it became harder to prove. Consider the position of a chief in early 19th century Fiji who had to restore balance after a grave offense committed by members of his village. The presentation of the tabua in the formal sorrow ceremony did not simply acknowledge the wrong. It changed the time horizon of his authority. Once accepted, the injured party gained a recognized claim on future respect, support, and restraint. His village's labor, its resources, and its political alignment now moved inside a relationship that could not simply be cancelled. The ceremony did not reset the balance. Part of the future had already been promised. The same mechanism operated when a chief presented a tabua to persuade a neighboring group to join in defense. Acceptance did not merely confirm support for one event. It created a remembered tie between groups, one that could later require protection, return, or restraint. A sacred object could bind a village, but it couldn't organize ordinary exchange. The more often society needed tabua, the more its natural source became the system's constraint. Because tabua were indivisible and could not be broken into smaller units, they were ill-suited for minor or frequent transactions. A village that needed to settle several disputes in one season might find its store of high-value objects exhausted. The scarcity itself reinforced the object's authority. Abundance would have diluted the very tension that gave the tabua its force. When European whalers later began supplying more teeth, the influx altered the balance of power, but that change still lay ahead. The consequences reached beyond single events. Tabua concentrated the ability to create binding alliances in the hands of those who controlled the most valued items. They allowed long-distance diplomacy across island groups without portable coin. They turned abstract respect into a concrete, transferable asset that could move between communities while carrying the memory of the original transfer. Yet the very qualities that made them effective, rarity, sacredness, public ritual, and unbroken social memory, also limited their reach. They could not scale with population growth or expanding trade networks. They could not serve as a neutral medium for daily exchange among commoners. The system functioned beautifully within the world it was built for, but only as long as that world remained small enough for memory, ceremony, and natural scarcity to govern every important transfer. A form of wealth that depended on sacred rarity, public ritual, and unbroken memory could bind communities with extraordinary force. But it could not expand indefinitely without weakening the conditions that made it powerful. The tabua worked because it was rare, recognized, and socially remembered. The more society needed transferable value beyond those limits, the more another answer became necessary. In the next episode, we will examine how feather money offered a different solution to the problem of symbolic wealth. Through manufactured, graded, and visibly measured bundles, value could be made more deliberately. But only by creating new pressures around production, recognition, and control.